This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
There is a strange tension sitting over this case. The case against Tyler Robinson, the man accused of assassinating Charlie Kirk. One part courtroom, one part political theater. The shooting that left a man dead on a Utah campus and a country immediately looking for answers. The name on everyone's lips is Tyler Robinson, accused of killing conservative commentator Charlie Kirk, of course. And already the narrative feels, kind of written. The president praised law enforcement for catching the suspect. The FBI director said the nation could breathe easier. Within hours, headlines weren't asking if Robinson did it. They were asking why. That's not how trials work. At least that's not how they're supposed to. And this is a case where if you go off of the evidence that, we've seen that's out there, guy on the roof, we've seen the video, we've seen the shots, we've seen all sorts of things that point to this being the guy that did it. A lot of weirdness to this case, yes, without a doubt. So how do you defend this? How do you defend this, assuming, and let's just take conspiracy theory out of this for a second, and I'm not saying you're wrong if you have conspiracy theories. I am not, okay? I'm saying for the sake of this argument, for the sake of dissecting the case in this capacity, let's assume that the video, the shots that they have of him, the security camera footage of him, which clearly is him in the building, all that, let's assume he did it and he's on camera doing it and the note's real. And I know, again, just take conspiracy out of it for a moment. I'm trying to have this conversation not in any sort of political slant or any sort of conspiracy or non-conspiracy. Just let's operate for a moment on this, okay? And you can give me your thoughts in the comments section. I would love to hear them. Because I think a lot of us are confused and a lot of us are having a hard time believing our eyes, or, sometimes a simple explanation is usually reality. But I don't know. I don't know. And I don't think you do either. But for a moment, let's pretend, or let's accept, whatever, that the narrative as has been fed to us is what took place, okay? How do you defend that? That's the question. Because that's likely how this will play out in a courtroom. They're not going to be going to conspiracy theories and all that. I mean, unless it's part of the defense, I don't know. But if what we know now, as being said, that is how, unless something else insane happens here, that's how the prosecution is going to play their narrative. So how do you defend against that narrative? In a courtroom, guilt isn't decided by trending topics or press conferences. It's decided by evidence that still hasn't been tested in front of a jury. And that's what makes the road ahead rather complicated. I know, it looks like it could be simple. I don't know. Right now, Robinson's defense team, 3 lawyers, 2 from California, 1 local, is staring at a mountain that looks impossible to climb. They're representing a man accused of one of the most politically charged murders in years. And their first battle isn't with the prosecution, it's with perception. When your client's name is already synonymous with assassin, you don't walk into court to win. You walk in hoping to survive. The early hearings have shown the dynamic clearly. The defense fought for him to appear in civilian clothes instead of jail garb, and the judge agreed, surprisingly. He'll be allowed to wear regular clothing, the kind of detail that might sound trivial until you realize how powerful that impression is in front of a jury. But the request to remove his shackles was denied. He'll remain restrained during proceedings. So visually, the case already sits in a contradiction. A defendant dressed like a student, but bound like a prisoner. Presumed innocent. presented otherwise. It's a kind of symbolism that tells you everything about what's coming. This is not going to be a quiet case. Now, let's talk about what's known, or at least what's alleged. Prosecutors say they have digital evidence tying Robinson to the crime, electronic communications, location data, forensic material they claim establishes his role. They've referenced what they described as incriminating statements made to family members, but those claims haven't been introduced as evidence yet. And no independent party has verified them. Everything remains in the realm of allegation. And that matters, because once you say confession, the public stops listening to anything else. And, they kind of came out with all of this stuff like within the first few days, stuff that usually takes months, if not years, to get in court, to get elicited from someone. It was rather stunning just how much of it was spelled out in the note. And he already confessed back there behind the scenes. You didn't see it, but he confessed. Okay? Hoping you're telling the truth. Still, if even half of what prosecutors are describing holds up, this defense has a monumental job ahead of it. They'll have to attack every inch of the state's case, not by disproving guilt outright, but by forcing the system to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's where strategy becomes everything. First, there's the question of venue. Can he get a fair trial in Utah when every news outlet, every national figure has already weighed in? The defense could move for a change of venue, but where do you move a case like this? It's not as though there's a corner of the state untouched by this story. Jurors everywhere will have heard about it. The defense might try to argue that the publicity is so prejudicial, it's impossible to seat an impartial jury. It's a long shot, but in a case this public, it might be the only shot. Then comes the evidence itself. If those alleged digital messages do exist, the defense will challenge how they were collected, whether they were authenticated, whether chain of custody can be proven, and that is important. Every text, every screenshot, every timestamp becomes a potential fault line. I know, we've already seen them in public, which is kind of weird. If they can find just one break, one missing link between device and user, that is reasonable doubt. That's how defense lawyers survive when the facts look bad. They turn the prosecution story into Swiss cheese. They'll also bring in experts, firearms specialists to examine trajectory and distance, psychologists to evaluate mental state, and digital forensics analysis to scrutinize metadata, account access, and the possibility of tampering. Because no matter what the police report says, none of it counts until an expert can testify and a jury believes them. Okay? This is not opinion. This is fact. This is how this process works. Anything I just said there is not political. It is simply, here's how the process functions, like it or not. And let's be really realistic. The defense doesn't just have to fight the evidence. They have to fight the emotion of this case. A beloved public figure killed on stage, literally. A suspect accused of doing it for ideological reasons. And a political climate so divided that everyone sees what they want to see. That's not a courtroom. That's a powder keg. So the defense has to change the conversation. They can't make this about politics. They have to make it about a person. And that's where you'll see them shift from a guilt phase defense to a life phase defense. In other words, they'll spend the first half of the trial fighting the charge and the second half fighting the death penalty. If this case goes capital, which it is, their best weapon won't be evidence, it'll be empathy. They'll highlight that Robinson had no prior criminal record, that he was young, that he had promised before his life detonated. They may argue that he was drawn into radical spaces online, influenced by forces much larger than himself, blah, 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 blah. It's not an excuse, but it is an explanation. If they can convince even one juror that he's more broken than evil, that may be enough to spare his life, and that is probably what the goal is at this point, because in a capital case, the math is brutal. 12 votes for death or anything less means life. The defense doesn't need to win. It just needs one juror who can't pull their trigger. It's grim arithmetic. But that's how these cases play out. Of course, this raises a larger question. How do you humanize someone that would already, the world already sees as a symbol? You can't argue innocence without proof. You can't argue ideology without alienating half the jury. So you argue human frailty. You paint him as someone manipulated, not monstrous. That's the thin moral thread between a death sentence and a life behind bars. And yet, even that path is complicated because every public statement, every leak, every pressure to prosecutors to go for the maximum penalty, this isn't just a murder case. It's a message that political violence will be met with the harshest punishment possible. And when justice becomes messaging, fairness tends to disappear. That's what the defense will try to remind the jury, that this trial isn't about sending a message to America. It's about one man's life, that no matter what he's accused of, the law demands proof, not politics. And maybe that argument lands, or maybe in a climate this charged, it doesn't stand a chance. What's clear is that this case isn't only testing a defendant, it's testing whether the system can still live up to its own principles when the whole world is watching. Well, we've seen what happens when trial becomes spectacles. The cameras roll, the commentary floods in, and justice starts to look like entertainment. So when this one finally goes to trial, transparency will matter because secrecy breeds conspiracy, and this case already has enough of that. Letting the public see the evidence, hear the testimony, and watch the process unfold might be the only way to restore even a fragment of trust. And then there's the personal side. His parents. Reports say they've cooperated with investigators, and if that's true, it's likely they'll be called as witnesses. Imagine that. Parents who may have helped law enforcement now forced to take the stand in a trial that could end with their child's execution. That's not a legal issue. That is a moral earthquake. And if the case reaches the penalty phase, they'll almost certainly be part of the defense's mitigation effort. Not to deny what happened, but to beg for their son's life, if they want to. Because the death penalty isn't just about the defendant. It's about everyone attached to them who has to live with what comes next. So yes, the defense has options, procedural, evidentiary, psychological, but the gap between what's possible on paper and what's realistic in court is enormous. Overwhelming evidence, intense public scrutiny, and political weight can crush even the best strategy. In a case like this, you're not just defending a person, you're fighting gravity. And that's where the story becomes bigger than Tyler Robinson or Charlie Kirk. It becomes a story about whether our justice system can still tell the difference between punishment and vengeance, whether the words presumed innocent still mean anything when a case becomes national shorthand for evil. Maybe Robinson's lawyers find a flaw, a missing link in the forensics, a mishandled piece of digital evidence. Maybe they don't. Maybe this ends exactly how everyone expects it to, but the process still matters. Because if we abandon fairness when the crime shocks us most, then the concept of fairness is worthless. This trial, when it finally begins, won't just be about one man's guilt. It will be a mirror showing us how much faith we still have in an idea that truth belongs in a courtroom, not in a headline. And that, more than any verdict, is what's really on trial here. Tell me your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already there, search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski, and that's where you will find us. Find us on social media. Find us wherever you get podcasts. Do that same search. Boom, there we are. Press subscribe. Do highly encourage that, and I ask you, please, if you like what we're doing, you like the commentary, you like the work, please do. It's what keeps us alive. So thank you for that in advance if you're not already subscribed. Until next time, I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.